And instead of following up on official airports with Newark, let us go further south than what we have already addressed with Atlanta, since it would be foolish not to consider any Florida targets, with most of the 19 hijackers having lived and gone to flight school there. As you may recall, after the fiasco with JFK and LaGuardia airports breaking out over the arrest of over a dozen suspects, there was an ABC News report on the early morning of September 14th at 1:28 a.m. with Ted Koppel and Pierre Thomas reporting on activity going on in Miami.
Yes, Peter, just to give you an example of how sweeping the investigation is unfolding across the country, sources are telling us that in Miami today, federal authorities have detained 4 additional people. Now, we're being told that 3 women and 1 man were detained in Miami. Their backgrounds are being investigated. And here's the reason why they were very suspicious of these people. Apparently at Miami International Airport, a woman went into a facility, changed clothes into flight attendant wear. A man who was in the vicinity began to run. Officials detained the man. Also, along with the woman, there were 2 other women who were wearing flight attendant wear as well. All 4 of these people have been detained. They're being questioned tonight. The suspicion is they might have ties, might be supporting some of these earlier attacks. Again, it's still unfolding. It may not turn out to be a connection, but the authorities are investigating, Ted.
The story was only picked up twice again on ABC just a couple of hours later by Darren McGinty, with a slight difference in details.
That 3 men and a woman were detained in Miami last night, and sources say suspicions were raised when one of the women changed into a flight attendant's uniform and the man ran from the scene.
Of course, McGinty's report, being that there were 3 men and 1 woman, sounds more plausible. But then again, here we are with the repeated detail of a woman being involved, as was reported between JFK and LaGuardia, as well as within the raid in Boston hotels the next day on September 12th. 5 hours later on CNN, Kelly Arena had picked up the story after being the first news source naming off 18 hijacker names from the 4 official 9/11 flights, as well as the update with the majority of the JFK and LaGuardia detainees being freed.
We also know that in Miami's airport, sources say that law enforcement detained several people there. One woman was seen walking into the airport in civilian clothing, went into the restroom, came out in a flight attendant uniform. She was with a man who also had a flight attendant uniform. When they were approached by authorities, they ran, but they were captured and they are now being questioned. And we also know that the U.S. Coast Guard has boarded a Carnival Cruise Line ship off the coast of Miami earlier today. They detained 2 people who authorities describe as having a history of hijacking. According to law enforcement sources, that ship was boarded at 3 a.m. after the passenger list was checked by authorities. So this manhunt continues, Leon, around the country.
And yes, according to what Kelly Arena said, authorities arrested suspects off this Carnival cruise ship in Miami. And none of this should be a surprise, although some reports could be just cases of false alarms, as there was also a bomb threat at the Orlando airport to consider.
A bomb threat at the Orlando airport turned out to be nothing, but no one was taking chances. The jitters are obvious not only at the airports, but among Americans just contemplating air travel.
And as we shown earlier with the morning of 9/11, Bush having attended an elementary school in Sarasota, and like it or not, it was also reported that the Secret Service had good intel that Air Force One was a target. But as a scenario with the port of entry from the north, like the possible suspects coming into the U.S. from Canada onto Maine, rendezvousing with official 9/11 hijackers, could there likely have been other suspects entering the country from the south, even the coastline to become operational in Florida? Quite possibly. As with the Qatari trio, there seems to be another trio with Afghani operatives having been staked out and preparing days before 9/11 off the Cayman Islands.
The one thing that the FBI has been able to stitch together is at least 7 of the pilots on their list of 19, the suicide pilots, were actually trained in Florida. And now there are questions. Were there any sort of warning signs that this was going to happen? There are details emerging tonight from the Cayman Islands.
Line has learned that U.S. government officials are now in the Cayman Islands investigating a letter delivered to a radio station there on August 29th, 12 days before the hijackings. The anonymous letter writer said he was convinced that 3 Afghanis who'd entered the island illegally were agents of Osama bin Laden, and he warned that they, quote, are organizing a major terrorist act against the U.S., via an airline or airlines. He asked a radio station talk show host to pass that information to the authorities and, quote, refrain from being naive and complacent in this serious situation. A radio station manager forwarded the letter to a Cayman government official on September 6th, but according to a government statement, treated it as, quote, merely speculation on the part of the author. The government goes on to say the writer has now been interviewed and has stated that indeed the letter was purely speculation on his part. Dateline has been unable to reach the author. The 3 men the letter writer said were agents of Osama bin Laden are now being held in prison in the Cayman Islands.
Now, those 3 men have not been charged with any crimes. They're being held on immigration charges because they were in the Cayman Islands illegally. The United States has investigators in the Cayman Islands that plan to talk to those 3 men. So, again, this was a letter from an anonymous writer. We have spoken, Dateline has spoken to that writer. But again, the government saying this was just speculation, but certainly a curious connection here of the timing of the letter and, of course, the details.